Morning, everyone. Welcome to day two. I'm joined this morning for this panel by four colleagues of mine from across the United States, all working on different aspects of GIS for Next Generation 911. One of the things that I've learned in my role working as a Virginia Geospatial Program Manager for Next Generation 911 GIS is that at the state level, we're all trying to do some very similar things, but we're all also very different because all of our states are slightly different in terms of how we're structured and how we're organized and how things have been done. So I was really excited and grateful to my colleagues, Natalie in Georgia, Megan in Indiana, Jason in North Dakota, and Dan in Washington to be able to join us for this conversation so we can talk a little bit about what our different states are doing, how our 911 and enterprise GIS functions are set up and how that may impact what we're all doing with Next Generation 911 GIS. And then also talking about some of the different programmatic elements that we've used to help our localities or those in our state succeed with Next Generation 911 GIS. So by way of introduction, so talk a little bit about Virginia. What does Next Generation 911 look like in our state? We have 134 PSAPs. 23 of those are currently live on Next Generation 911 with geospatial call routing. That covers about 19% of our PSAPs, but 42% of our population, but only about 19% of our land area. So there's some really interesting figures there. And if we think about those deployments in Northern Virginia and the population cluster, that's kind of where we're at, but we have a plan to get everybody else there. So 911 and enterprise GIS in Virginia are actually located in the same part of state government. We were part of what we call the Integrated Services Bureau. Now we're part of the 911 and Geospatial Services Bureau. And our 911 coordinator and our GIO equivalent, our VGIN coordinator, actually shared the same workspace when we were working in the office. And so it's probably more tightly intertwined than most other states. That led to the Virginia E911 Wireless Fund, not only helping fund the public safety communications and the deployments, but also funding part of the enterprise GIS focused on building statewide address layers and road centerline layers with data supported from the localities. So when we started talking about Next Generation 911, and GIS's role in it, it was pretty easy for our work group, for the PSC folks to handle the grants and the process and core service provider recommendations and giving the information to the localities so they could make their choice of how to proceed. And then kind of bounce it over the cubicle wall to us on the GIS side to help support localities in getting their GIS data ready, getting it onboarded, getting it through the process. So that's a little bit of what Virginia looks like in their process. Jason, North Dakota is a little bit different because you were on one of the earlier EZNets and you're now moving to the Next Generation 911 EZNet. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like in North Dakota and how 911 and GIS are structured?
Sure thing. Thanks, Matt. So in North Dakota, our state pretty much deferred 911 responsibilities to the counties back in the 90s. They did give our counties an ability to set their surcharge rates. So they do that on an individual basis up to $1.50. But what that ended up doing is creating a sort of a patchwork of 911 service around the state. So approximately 10 or 11 years ago, they all entered into a joint powers agreement that let them sort of band together and pursue both wireless 911 and Next Gen 911 all together. And my program at the North Dakota Association of Counties was selected as the administrator of that joint powers agreement. So essentially you have an association of counties guiding the program management of Next Generation 911, which includes the ESINet deployment, geospatial data development, and the sort of initiatives that are expected of that transition. We started our project back in 2011, our GIS project, as it was actually a program by the Department of Emergency Services to create a road centerline data set for all of the counties in the data set to drive their CAD system, because they provided services to 22 of our counties and needed a statewide data set because they're also the backup for all the other PSAPs. Back in 2015, we identified that project as a perfect candidate for the beginning of our Next Gen program. So we selected that and began sort of molding it into the standards that, at least at that time, were still evolving. We also work with our CAD partners around the state to identify any additional needs that might be required in that GIS data set to support CAD operations. So what we did is really just took the NENA standards and extended them as needed to support our Next Gen initiatives, but also our CAD systems in the state. And we got everybody on board with that. And part of that process was also the establishment of a GIS maintenance tool, an online tool. We've been through a couple of them since 2011, but the most recent one we have, and the way enterprise GIS looks in North Dakota, is we established a new web-based map change request system and data aggregation service through our provider, through our 911 database provider. And counties that are smaller, they submit change requests through that mapping program. And then on the back end, GIS analysts actually put those change requests into the fabric of the state network or points. We also then, for the larger counties, have services that will allow them to upload data to that aggregating agency, and then the aggregating agency will then connect it in with the rest. My role at the Association of Counties is to watch over the contract, to also establish provisioning boundaries, to work with counties and PSAPs to make sure that they're following standards and they're not stepping on one another's toes. Those are among my GIS responsibilities. Obviously, I've got the whole ball of wax, including the ESINet circuits and all that. But that's kind of a high level view, I guess, of what North Dakota's program looks like.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. And that raises a really interesting point too, in that some states, Next Generation 911 means you're building out and managing an ESINet that your localities use that states are responsible for helping maintain. Other states may not necessarily be doing that for different reasons, and may be just relying on Next Generation core service providers for some of those connections and networking that's involved. And so that's a really good point, because the complexity of what the state 911 looks like changes dramatically if the state opts to do it that way, takes on some of those challenges. Megan, how's Indiana work in terms of 911 and enterprise GIS?
Good morning. Thank you for the question, Nat. And Jason, thank you. I didn't really know that much about North Dakota, so that's good to know. So Indiana has focused our efforts mostly for Next Generation 911 by establishing a truly redundant ESINet. Most of the funding has been focused in that area, using two separate providers and then giving the PSAPs the choice of having which one as their primary. The rollout of the secondary ESINet has taken a couple of years, but it seems to be working as expected. Most of the call, or all of the call routing, is left to those core service providers. So the GIS portion is a bit separate at the moment. The 911 office, which is our state 911 board and 911 office, and the Geographic Information Office are two different organizations. Our 911 office is a quasi-government entity, and our office and my position are governor appointed. So very, very different operations. And as such, we have been in communication for the last decade and a half or so, not necessarily collaboration to the level that Matt and Jason spoke about. Both offices were established and by statute. And then now the GIO is also a board member on the state 911 board as effective of about 5 years ago. That has encouraged the collaboration. Having the opportunity to sit on that board has allowed us to have a greater insight into the state's next generation 911 plan and to continue the discussions of integrating the geospatial data to support routing and validation and what that really means. Our offices are responsible though for different things in supporting local and state level solutions and creating resources for folks to use. In practice, we are similar in that we do our best to support the counties and the PSAPs, not necessarily in a whole hosted statewide solution perspective for every aspect though. There's a difference of interpretation of support between our office and the 911 office. There's some considerations and nuances that go into the home rule things that kind of separate out what 911 office will do. Our office, but when it comes to the information sharing and solutions for geospatial databases to support Next Gen 911, I'll get into that in a little bit, but it's very much a grassroots effort.
Thanks, Megan. And one of the things that you really brought out there was when we compare states, you know, they're commonwealths, they're home rule states, and they're non-home rule states. And in some cases, commonwealths are kind of maybe the purest form of home rule states, where there is very much most of the power, most of the decisions are at the local level. Whereas in non-home rule states, it tends to be a stronger state government that steers and drives things, and those definitely create different patterns of 911 that we see across the country. So in some of the things that Jason talked about, and some of the things that Megan talked about, Dan, I think you're in some ways similar to Jason, in some ways similar to Megan, in terms of what Washington's doing. So could you talk about what's going on in Washington with Next Generation 911 and the relationship of 911 and enterprise GIS?
Sure, thanks, Matt. Yeah, like Jason, we had an ESInet statewide, but it was using those twisted copper wires, not Next Generation I3 compliant. And probably 10 years ago or more, we kind of made a statewide decision and more at the county level that we were going to go forward and do this next generation thing. Developing, you know, a kind of a game plan. And as my cubicle mate says, he plagiarized many other states' RFPs to come up with the RFP that we used to go forward and do great things. So we, as of today, we have an I3 compliant ESInet statewide. We're only 39 counties, although some of our counties are larger than several states. So not that they have a lot of people in them. So we have 62 PSAPs that are connected to our ESInet, and that includes a city of Moscow, Idaho as well, which is attached to one of our counties over in Eastern Washington. And it's taken kind of a progressively step-by-step process that we got through this whole thing, trying to make sure everybody is up to speed. I think Jason mentioned CAD systems, making sure that, you know, everybody's compliant with whatever, or having to deal with what their CAD setbacks were. The mapping component, the GIS component. One of the nice things about Washington is we have a state office, we have 12 personnel, we have a state coordinator, we have a tech staff, there's 4 of us, we have a cybersecurity, our telecom guy, my next door neighbor here, was 35 years in the telecom business, so he came to us with a great deal of knowledge. And then our boss is kind of a communications guru. And then we have the other side of the house, the operations side, that does all the contracting with the counties or with the vendors that are out there, making sure everything's running. As far as surcharge, we've got, it's 95 cents total. The counties get 70 cents per phone bill, and the state office gets 25 cents. That's great for the larger counties, you know, like a King County where Seattle's at, where you've got 2+ million people, you know, you end up having rather deep pockets, a lot more resources. The smaller counties, which, you know, have 3,000 people or less, we call them kind of the have-nots. But so that's where the state office comes in. We help them out. You know, they have to basically deplete their funds, and then we come in and help them with salaries, equipment, software, whatever it may be. As I mentioned, we're a state office. We're under the Emergency Management Division within the Washington Military Department, a state agency, and our agency head reports directly to the governor. So we've got those connections there. We also have a state mandated 911 advisory committee, and there's like different seats at the table representing large counties, small counties, east counties, west counties. Many of the vendors, whether it's wireless, wireline, VoIP, ambulance drivers, they all have a seat at the table. And then King County, being our most populous county with 20% of the population, they have their own vote. So they are the ones that said, move forward and do good things with this next generation thing. And as my boss said, we're kind of doing the a la carte version. We're kind of doing one little piece at a time. We're not quite, we're not into the ES or ECRF geospatial call writing yet, but by the end of March, we hope to be 100%. Text to 911, we're probably 2/3 of the way there. Each county is kind of taking little baby steps. Some wanted to jump right into the deep end, and because we've got some counties that have been up and running for 2 years. Others are still saying, well, I'm not sure if I like this idea. So it's kind of coming along. Another great thing is we've got a GIS now working group. We used to be a subcommittee under that advisory committee, and we've got a lot of pretty dedicated, sharp individuals out there. And I think one of them here is on the phone call. We have a chair and a co-chair, kind of leading the cats down the trail and making sure that everybody's up to speed. And unfortunately, I think this probably is true for everybody out there. And I know I've talked to Matt about this. We have the counties that have the deep pockets, they have a lot of personnel, and then we have some counties that don't have any GIS at all. We have one county that has no GIS program, period. And then we've got a couple others that have IT people trying to mask as GIS professionals, trying to get this thing down the road. And it hasn't gone quite as well as we would like. And that's where I also talked to Matt about, okay, there's 25% of his counties are actually contracting out. Some of them are just leery about doing that, but we want to kind of push them in that direction, or have somebody else come in and help them out just to get them over that hump. So we're making it, not quite there 100%, but we're probably further along than many other states.
Thanks, Stan. It's exciting to hear how the progress towards ECRF routing has come along in Washington. And last but certainly not least, and also probably the warmest based on our geographic locations today, Natalie, can you give us a rundown of Georgia and how 911 and enterprise GIS are structured in Georgia, and how that relates to next gen 911?
Absolutely. And thank you again for having me. So I'm the Georgia Data Geospatial Data Programs Manager. And so I sit inside of the Geospatial Information Office under the officer Susan Miller. And that means that I'm responsible for building those state data programs that are sustainable, and they source data from locals in some cases, provide them to locals in some cases. And then they're meant to serve all of the regional needs to the extent that they can, so local and regional needs. And we're behind in some ways from our sister states that are on this call, but that's been really good because we can learn from their journeys to 911. And I would say that's been incredibly helpful for Georgia to be able to communicate kind of across state boundaries with other people and say, what's been working well for you? What do you wish that you would have done? So to understand our structure in Georgia, it kind of helps to know that we are the home ruliest of home rule states, I think. We have 159 counties in Georgia, roughly 163 primary PSAPs. We also often talk about Georgias having two different Georgias. What people mean by that is that we often have a big difference between Atlanta, where 500,000 of our people live, and then rural Georgia or coastal Georgia or mountain region. And so it's quite a challenge to unite everybody around a common goal, because they have to see the benefit to themselves, and they have a lot of authority over what they're going to participate in, what they're going to be able to do, and a lot of difference in how much funding they have and the structures that they have. So the state also has this habit of not really doing a lot of interagency coordination. I will say during COVID and during for 911, we're seeing that change, which is super exciting. In terms of NG 911, what we have right now, we have one EZNet, little standalone EZNet in a city in north of Atlanta. And then we have some PSAPs or some counties that only have just in the last couple of years started providing 911 service at all. So that's quite a range of difference. We do have, as of 2018, we have the Georgia Emergency Communications Authority. It's led by a 15-member board of directors that's appointed by the governor. It has state, local, and private sector folks on it. And then, of course, we have the GIO, who was only stood up about a year before that officially, and is building out staff. So we're relatively small, but mighty, I would like to say. So similar to what others have said, we have strong GIS counties, and then we have people that have no GIS whatsoever. And so really our program of being able to provide data is going to require a lot of flexibility. So we've been, looking at that since we kind of started the 911 program and trying to take advantage of the federal grant to be able to say, what is a sustainable way to source data and feed it in, validate it, aggregate it, feed it into an EZNet. But what are some other ways that we can build off of this effort that's uniting everybody around this common goal and serve more than just 911? So I would say we're really in the strategization support stage right now.
Thanks, Natalie. And I kind of tie some of what you said to some of the other things that other folks mentioned. With Virginia, we probably have about 5 Virginias, Northern Virginia, Tidewater, and then kind of moving out west. North Dakota, a lot of the population is centered in Fargo, Grand Forks, Bismarck. Dan mentioned King County and Seattle, and in Indiana, there are certain, Indianapolis is huge. There are some other large cities up there in the Northwest along Chicago, but there's also quite a bit of ruralness in between, especially in Southern Indiana. And so I really like that this theme of, I really wouldn't call it a digital divide. I'd call it geography. When I think about it in Virginia, it's, there are geographical differences, or we can understand differences between the resources or abilities or willingness or technology or infrastructure between our different counties and PSAPs and what they're willing to support in some part by the regions, by the geography. And so I like that a lot of us kind of touched on that in different ways. To Natalie's point and to Dan's point also, what that means if we are trying to support NG 911 GIS in a state, means that I like to think of it as, we kind of have to meet you where you're at and help you get to where you need to go. Because everybody's coming in at a different place. Some may have GIS, some may not. Some have a lot of turnover in those abilities. I think, Dan made the point of, well, we have some IT folks trying to do GIS, but if that's the choice that the locality makes to meet that need, then that's important to help make them successful with that. So kind of, recognizing those challenges, I think that all of our states are also doing or thinking about doing different things to help support the GIS component overall. And Jason mentioned some of this in terms of having, map viewers or common focus points, to help integrate and work with that data, work with those changes. So I'll open it up for the group. What other kind of GIS specific components have you implemented as part of your program or your support, or are you thinking about? And so things like data integration or data readiness and QC checks or boundary development. What's going on in your state?
Well, I can chime in because I kind of left it out where Jason mentioned it, but right now the way we're operating, we have a primary contract that's kind of putting all the pieces together, but we have a subcontractor who happens to be one of our conference supporters, sponsors. All the counties, being that they're the authoritative ruler of their GIS data, they upload that data to the subcontractor. They go through the squeaky wheel of the QA/QC, and then they merge that all into a statewide geodatabase with all the required and highly recommended data layers. And you can download them. And it used to be once a week that came out. Now it's like anytime a county uploads any of their data, then a new statewide version comes out. So I'll get, sometimes 5 or 6 new statewide data sets a day. One of the problems we had early on is that we started down this road before NINA came out with a GIS data model. And so we came up with the Washington data model, which we had plagiarized a draft version because we had one of our members as a member of the NINA working group putting that thing together and, taking their 8 years to do it. So we kind of went down that road. Unfortunately, at the time, the site structure address points was not a required data set. So some of the counties said, well, we're not doing that. That's a lot of effort. And so when it came out, said, oh, now it's a required data set. Some of those folks are still to this day scrambling to put something together. But I think this, I mentioned this GIS working group we've got. That's where all the GIS people across the state can get together and talk, hash out things. We just had an opportunity to put together our own policy on what will be required by the counties that they have a contract with my office. And so if you're not meeting certain requirements, like submitting data on a timely manner, fixing critical errors on a timely manner, those things there, you get your hand slapped, or maybe, or worse, you get money withheld. So it's working fairly well, although we still have some hiccups that we could work out. But as time goes on, we hope things will get better.
This is Jason. In North Dakota, just like it is in Washington, it sounds like most of our counties are have-nots. So the way we've been able to support those counties is they buy into this program. So they're part of the Joint Powers Agreement, which means they're remitting a portion of their funds for administration of the program. Part of the program is GIS management, GIS coordination, and to a large degree, it's GIS data development and not so much the maintenance, but it's getting the data for these counties to a point where it can be used for 911 services. So we've been doing a lot, both here at the North Dakota Association of Counties and also our Department of Emergency Services, on getting the GIS data to where the county's addressing system and the city addressing systems within those counties are really top notch, and they're as tightly tied to the addressing schemas as was intended. And then we help those counties migrate that GIS data into an MSEG workflow that replaces the legacy MSEG workflow. So we don't really so much even pay attention to existing MSEGs. What we do is we build our data to match reality, to match the intended systems, and then we upgrade the records that are tied to the MSEGs and make that part of the process. So in addition to providing services, aggregation services, and web change request systems, we also do a fair amount of the editing. But that's really just a byproduct of bringing in some of the revenues from those counties, getting those commissioners to buy into the program, and then the GIS folks or the IT folks. We have sheriffs doing GIS work in North Dakota too. They know that their commission is behind this initiative, and then they need to participate in it. So it's been a pretty good relationship.
I can kind of chime in with what George is doing. What we were asked for, what we knew from just our NG911 working groups and kind of talking to our locals and regional representatives across the state, all of them were asking for leadership and structure. And they wanted tools, but they wanted tools that were not going to micromanage their processes because they were all so different. And so what we've been doing is using a tool at the state level. We're building out a toolbox that allows them to kind of have their data be fenced. And what I mean by that is we allow them to kind of translate their data, we validate it, and then if it meets a certain threshold, we roll it up into the state level data set. And we're in the midst of rolling that out right now, actually. So what we did is if we were going to be able to do that, if we were going to have them be able to map their data, we needed to, first explain to them why they needed to do this at all and what the benefits to them would be. And so we rolled out a big outreach campaign to explain to them kind of what things they were going to deal with, connect them to each other so that they would be able to rely on each other to ask questions and help each other out. And then we built data standards. So we built the Georgia Geospatial data standards last year, and we rolled those out. And one of the other things that we've provided to them is lots of online resources. So everything we do, we record it, we post it online so that people can go and do training if they need to remember how to do things. But this particular set of tools, we wanted them to be really agnostic, so not 911 specific, but something that we could use for like parcels, or we could use for streams. So those tools are going to be really useful to us in the future. And the other thing that we've been doing is creating a playbook for boundary reconciliation. So again, if what they want is kind of how do we go about this, we've been trying to provide them kind of just a structured approach for Georgia specifically. How do you reconcile your boundaries across jurisdictional boundaries? How do you talk to each other? And then also, how do you reconcile those to the state service delivery strategies? In Georgia, we have a legal document that describes what services each local government is going to provide to their constituents. And that legal document says like 911 or fire or police is going to be served for this jurisdiction by this entity. Well, that's really tricky because that document is not geospatial. So it describes something, but then when you actually map it out and you sit with these entities and you say, okay, where is this? They're like, well, it's this house, but not this one. It's this road, but only to the 500 block and on this side of the street, but not the sidewalk. So those they need a lot of help with just facilitating those discussions and having kind of an approach of how we're expecting them to do that and then to feed us the data. So that's what we've been providing in terms of guidance.
Go ahead, Megan.
Do you want to add something, Matt?
No, you go ahead, and I will draw the threads together, continue the conversation, and we'll start trying to navigate to some of the questions that have come in through the Q&A and chat.
Awesome. So our state's support of GIS has, like I mentioned, been definitely a grassroots level of support. The coordination is happening from our office, but Indiana is supported by volunteers from private sector GIS and 911 experts, NINA and APCO Indiana chapters. That's been a really interesting partnership for about the last 12 or 14 months. Really trying to bring in that 911 piece, working on the crosswalk between how do you speak 911 and how do you speak GIS, and how do we get those two folks to speak to each other. In Indiana, finding those folks that do both and have a foot in both of those sandboxes is kind of like finding a unicorn. So if we can bring those folks together and teach them a common language, that's really part of that goal of that working group. Much like Georgia, we've been asked to provide coordination and some leadership. Where we thought we might hit some roadblocks with asking for data standards, we actually found that people asked for data standards. And really gave us an encouragement to be able to do that. So the path ahead for NG911 and GIS data, it's the responsibility of each county. Counties can use their 911 funds to help improve their GIS data, and our 911 office had a great grant program so they took the federal funds, but they did a really nice program implementation for grant funding. And one of the priorities was for GIS improvement. That's helped more than 18 of our counties, 18 of our 92 counties, put address ranges on their center lines, which is like step one. So that was a critical data piece that we found that was lacking in many counties. And we work closely with the vendors in those counties to help make sure that they're following the data standards that we ask them to follow. So on that standard piece, we did with our IGIC working group and our office create standards and schemas for roads and addresses. We're working right now on the boundary standards, but all of those follow the NENA standards. Right now, it's an ask of the counties to submit their data annually to the state. While every county does participate in an entirely voluntary data harvest program, we have a handful of counties that submit in the suggested data schema. Each year, we get a few more counties, so that progress is really encouraging. We only do minor data augmentation on the data that's submitted. Minor spell checks and things like that, because we give all of the authority of that data to the counties. But we do still collaborate, or bring all that data together and submit it out through in statewide data layers. Those are not yet making it into GIS, into 911 though. That piece isn't happening yet. And so we encourage those counties to get there to improve their data. Last year, we started giving out gold stars to the counties. We have a data dashboard that shows counties that have submitted data and those who haven't, and the ones that are following the schema get like a gold star. So that's been really fun to really encourage the participation. We did get a request to start giving out silver stars. So we'll consider that, the people who are really working on it. But given that it's voluntary, we're asking, it takes quite a bit of money, and the counties are really trying to work on that on their own to improve it for multiple reasons. And our campaign is explaining that we're improving it for Next Gen 911, but you're also improving it for so many different data sets that are going to improve local data sharing across counties, as well as the state collaboration data sharing for addresses and boundaries and such. I am unaware of the development of the GIS data that's part of the geospatial call routing. And my understanding is that at this point, we're having an acceptable approach of using some legacy data to do that. So still trying to work in that area to actually connect the legacy data and the GIS data and talk about how we can improve that geospatial call routing.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks everyone for tackling that question. I wanted to cycle back to a question that Ed Wells put in the chat box that I think some of us have already addressed based on our comments, but I kind of want to point to it because it does tie with the theme of the conference. It's public safety, but also location and enterprise addressing. And his question is, in our states, does the GIO or 911 coordinator aggregate local address data into a statewide address database? Do the locals provide the data in a standard format, and who else uses that data? So I know that Megan just addressed that, with the data that they get voluntarily and assembling that. Virginia does the same thing. We do a data call twice a year. We integrate address points and road center lines into core data sets. We put those in the national address data set. We push them out as downloads and services. Our state transportation department uses that line work for their linear referencing because they know that that's the locally mapped integrated rolls up. And a lot of our other state agencies see the benefit of that. We also use that similar to what Natalie discussed for doing checks to prepare the data for NG911. It's all in their different formats, but we field map it and we run some tools and provide some report cards, provide some accuracy assessments and give that feedback. Because ultimately, if they improve their data for public safety purposes, they're going to improve their data for all the other purposes that they use those address points and road center lines for. You know, if that's network analysis or permitting or utilities. But in Virginia, we kind of do that because each of our generally each of our 134 PSAPs are loading the data into the EZNet themselves. Some states do kind of a big bang a GIS data load approach. North Dakota is probably most similar to that. It gets uploaded to Jason's role kind of as the vendor coordinator, and then it gets moved up. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, you know, but Virginia being Commonwealth, more home rule, it's, you know, you can give it to us and we'll integrate it, but you're also responsible for determining your path of how to get that data into 911. So Jason, did I get that right in my assessment?
Yeah, I believe you did. We, as a state, we tried to do this internally, and in fact, we had been doing a lot of the aggregation work at the Department of Emergency Services, and then moving data over to NDACO for initial QA/QC before it went on to our 911 database provider. But we found as we took more and more counties on, as we cleaned up the data, as we made the MSEG changes and carrier changes, and began to take on more of that aggregating responsibility, it started to get in the way of some of our department's vision, in the sense that they were spending a majority of their time working on data maintenance for counties versus, you know, working on hazard mitigation plans for other areas. So we just ran out of resources, quite frankly, and that is why we turned to our 911 database provider to take on that load, so that we could get back to doing what our agencies are good at, and then also creating a direct relationship with our counties and the 911 database provider like they've had with the MSEG provider. We didn't want to get in the way of being that choke point, not getting information to a database provider in a timely fashion. But we wanted to improve our efficiency, so that's what we ended up doing, is migrating that aggregation responsibility over to private industry. As I said, just mostly because we ran out of resources, but also we wanted to make sure they had a direct line of sight with their records that are live in the 911 system.
All right, thanks, Jason. So Sean in Missouri asked a question that we've touched on a little bit. Some of us have localities or jurisdictions that don't have GIS. What are some strategies that you've seen in your states working with localities, providing grassroots level support and helping explain the importance of GIS for next generation 911, or trying to help the folks at the local level understand that and provide them with strategies to build or meet the capacity, the GIS capacity needed for next generation 911 in other ways?
Yeah, I think I mentioned in Washington, we've got a lot of the smaller counties, you know, they have maybe one person that does GIS for everybody. And they even do windows and maybe go out and get coffee at the same time. But we've got kind of a mix. We've got some folks working in some counties helping out in other counties, their neighbors. We've got a few contractors that have come in and helped out some of the smaller counties to kind of get things up and running. Some have more long-term, some are more short-term, you know, just you're around until we get to this point and then we're going to do something else after that. I would kind of like to have a more long-term approach for that. And like I said, our state office provides funding for GIS positions specifically, but sometimes the counties, they have the ability to put that fund somewhere else. Like if they want to buy a new CAD system or they're whatever it may be, they may, you know, funnel that money somewhere else. And that's kind of a lead on to one of the questions that you asked about, you know, advice for those, you know, kind of going down the same path as educating the 911 coordinators about GIS. because a lot of them haven't got a clue. And then it's kind of late in the game now, but they're starting to realize that, yeah, this GIS stuff is kind of important. Otherwise, we can't do that geospatial call routing. And it's kind of this, you know, one step at a time, but that is an important step, trying to make sure that all 39 counties and all 62 PSAPs right now that are connected are on the same sheet of music. And we're almost there, but we still have a few counties that are having, you know, they're struggling because they don't have those resources available.
100% agree with what you said, like getting everybody on the same page. That outreach step is so important, and we've seen that in Georgia, and more so than just you or having a vendor come in and educate. What can be helpful is having, you know, your local rural county who 5 years ago realized that they could do this GIS thing and they could collect their trash route. And then they told the tax assessor about it, and now they're doing this project and they've seen it be so useful and actually save them money. That could be a really powerful story to kind of rally the locals together and say, you know, if you just talk to each other about what you need, you'll find that you can pull your resources together and build this data and maintain it, and it can be helpful for everyone. And I would say, you know, them talking to each other is just really, really helpful. For other advice, I mean, just the outreach part is so important, and making sure that you talk to other states, and you ask really good questions about what's working, what's not working. And then just everything that you know, just share it, because people are really hungry for information. They want to be able to get to it. So making sure that you kind of structure the way that you do your program in a way that's really transparent, and allows people to talk to each other as well as to you, I think is super important. And just staying flexible.
I want to add and maybe put Natalie on the spot for a little bit. One of the brochures that Georgia created, we sort of took a couple pages out of your playbook, and was one of the things I like about it, and that we really stress is meet them where they are and meet them with the same language that they speak. And because it is a different language. Understanding in public safety, the information or the way that we can use location data to improve our service delivery and improve the way that we respond to everything, it's really a no-brainer for most people in public safety. They know that location is key. So for us, being able to go into a PSAP and not use I can use PSAP, but I can't use PSAP with GIS people, but I can't say GIS in a PSAP because they don't necessarily understand always. Many of them do, but some of them that have nots maybe don't necessarily. So making it a little bit less intimidating has been really helpful for us. And I don't know, Natalie, if you have a link to that PDF, but it's plain language. And it really makes a difference, I think.
Yeah, I would say everything, just blanket statement. If you find anything that Georgia has, please take it, steal it. We call it R&D, rip off and duplicate, like anything that we have, and we're happy to share all of our materials, our workshops, everything is free.
Yeah, thanks for that, Natalie, and Megan for bringing up some of those resources. I would ask panelists, but also others, if you're attending the session, if you have resources at the state or regional or local level that are out there on the web, please put those links into the chat box so we can share those out and kind of help other folks find some of those materials that are out there without excessive Googling. I know that sometimes that gets to be a little bit challenging. And it would definitely echo, what Natalie talked about in terms of, if you do a webinar, record it. What we've often done in Virginia is we'll have an idea come up in our NG 911 GIS user group, and then that will turn into some sort of document or tool set. And then we'll do include that in when we talk to our boards, and then we'll do a webinar on it, and then we'll record the webinar and have that online, just to make it easy to refer back to for different things. So I have this slide up with all of our email addresses. I think all of us would be welcome and willing to receive emails and more direct questions about our different experiences. because I think one of the themes of this session is that we're all similar and we're all different, but we also have the common ground of working in next generation 911 GIS, recognizing that we want to be supportive of the folks that we work with in our different states, and want to see this be successful. So I definitely thank all of the panelists for their time and consideration, and especially getting on camera. I know it's really for some of us, and just thanks again for joining us. And Jeff, I'll turn it back over to you.